Hi, and welcome back. I got a great question from Chad Grove asking about how to make mixes that translate to other systems. I started to type a reply, then realised it was going to be quite long and quite profound, so I decided to make it a video script instead. However, it's not the kind of video I can illustrate with screen captures like usual, so I'll probably just be this animated waveform for most of it. Shut your eyes and treat it like a podcast if you like. Anyway, I'll paraphrase the question as follows. Given the almost infinite variety of possible playback systems and room acoustics that my listeners will be using, how is it possible to make a master that translates to all of them? And what's the point even trying? To quote the last part of the question directly, so do you just make it sound great on your system, assuming that the acoustics of the room are perfect? Well, yes and no. First of all, there's no such thing as a perfect room, for a couple of reasons. For a start, perfect control of a room's reflections is one of those goals you can get ever closer to without ever actually reaching, with exponentially diminishing returns for exponentially increasing expense. But more fundamentally, there's no definition of a perfect room. It's not as simple as just flattening out the frequency response. At least mastering engineers don't tend to aim for that. Rather, they'll tune their rooms to sound best with the widest variety of reference material. And of course, that's a subjective, artistic judgment, not an objective, scientific one. So that's the bad news. The good news is, we don't need a perfect room. And to understand that, we need to understand something really fundamental about how our ears and brains work, and what we're actually doing when we're mixing. Let's listen to some music. What can you hear? We've got drums and bass, rhythm guitar, piano, lead guitar. I'm assuming you all got that, right? But here's the thing. You didn't hear a bunch of separate instruments. You heard one single waveform. Well, okay, two, if you're listening in stereo. Those two waveforms then got decoded inside your head to become all those separate parts you heard. Now pause for a moment to reflect on how amazingly sophisticated that processing is, happening in real time, near instantaneously. And realise that what you perceive when you listen to a mix isn't some kind of objective reality. It's almost entirely constructed inside your head in response to the cues and clues your brain gets from objective reality. This gives us another way to think about clarity and separation within a mix. When a mix is cluttered and lacks separation between parts, that's because our brain doesn't have the right cues to know which parts of the sound belong to which instrument. We have to work harder to distinguish what each part is doing, or we fail to entirely, and the mix is harder to listen to. By contrast, a mix with good clarity and separation makes it easy for our brains to figure out which bits belong where, and we hear each part effortlessly sitting in its own space. But the amazing processing power of our brains doesn't stop there. It goes a lot further and deeper than that. Here's a little experiment you can all try. Make a recording of something in an untreated room, like a typical living room. It can be anything at all. Acoustic guitar, singing, even just spoken voice will do. Ideally, get someone else to perform it while you sit in the room and listen, and record with the mic somewhere close to your head. A fancy mic will work better, but your phone will do for this demonstration. Then go into another room, or put on some headphones, and listen back to your recording. And you can hear the room, right? You'll be aware of all sorts of room characteristics, like boxiness, or echo, or ringing resonances, that you were totally unaware of and unconcerned with when you were actually in the room. What's going on there? Well, brace yourselves, this might be a bit of a shock. The fact is, when you were in the room, your brain was correcting all those room problems automatically, in real time, without you even being aware of it. As soon as you walk into a room, your brain starts to analyse the acoustics and adjusts almost instantly to the new sound. By compensating for the room, you can hear what the source actually sounds like, in the same way that your brain will take account of the ambient light when judging what colour something is. But when you hear a recording of a room, your brain can't make those corrections anymore. Suddenly, you're hearing reality. This is an issue that lies at the heart of what we do as recording engineers. This is why you can't just throw up a microphone in any old room and record the sound as you heard it in the room. It's because there's a massive and key ingredient missing, that mind-blowingly sophisticated and complex compensation that goes on inside your head. So with that in mind, let's go back to the original question. There are basically two schools of thought. Some people think the room is absolutely critical and will spend a fortune tuning it to perfection. Other people say the room doesn't matter as long as you've tuned your ears to know how it sounds so that you can compensate. And actually, I'm going to say they're both right to a degree. So there is a level of badness in a room's response that simply can't be corrected for by your brain. As an analogy, an EQ cut like this one can be corrected by a corresponding EQ boost, no problem. But if you switch it to a notch filter with infinite attenuation at the centre frequency, there's no amount of boost that can compensate for that. Unfortunately, it's quite common for untreated bedrooms or living rooms to achieve this level of badness, especially in the low frequencies. So yes, you're going to need bass traps in the corners of your room. But you don't need to get the room response perfect. If you can tame those extreme notches into gentler cuts and get the room within acceptable parameters, your brain will take over and compensate for the rest. I'm going to repeat myself because this is important. I'm definitely not saying you don't need acoustic treatment. The better you tune your room, the less work your brain has to do to figure out what's actually coming from the monitors, and the easier and more pleasant it becomes to mix. But do your best to treat your room as far as your budget and/or tenancy agreements allow. Then focus on setting up your speakers as optimally as possible and learning the sound of the room. The more reference material you listen to on your monitors, the better. If your studio really is in your bedroom or living room, take advantage of that by using your monitors to listen to music, watch films, play games, and so on. So now you have your perfect room, or the closest you can get to it in reality. So make your mix sound perfect in that environment, and then trust to the amazing power of your listener's brain to compensate for the deficiencies in whatever system they happen to hear it on, in whatever room. As long as your mix is within acceptable boundaries, it should sound balanced pretty much anywhere. Now, obviously, some systems are just bad. If a subwoofer is tuned way too high and way too loud, your mix will probably sound like shit. But so will everyone else's. There's really nothing you can do about that. On the other hand, if you're listening to well-mixed reference material on a system, and your mix comes on and suddenly sounds really boomy and bassy by comparison, that's not something to ignore. Your mix does have a problem in that case. And if you're not hearing that problem in your mix position, it means you still need to improve your monitoring system. And by monitoring system, I of course mean your speakers and your room. Okay, that's all for now. Thanks for watching.